Before I do any interview, I have a conversation with whoever I'm interviewing and ask, tell me what your intention is, and I will tell you what my intention is, and let's see if we can align those two, because I don't want you to finish an interview and at the end of the interview say, I wish I had said.
There are moments in time that feel like they belong to everyone. Moments so public, so carefully constructed, so emotionally charged that the whole world stops and watches. The royal wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on May 19, 2018, was one of those moments. Billions of people tuned in. Streets were lined with flags. Television anchors spoke in hushed, reverent tones. And somewhere in that breathtaking chapel at Windsor, sitting among the most carefully selected guests in the world, was Oprah Winfrey, the most trusted interviewer on the planet, watching everything unfold. Fast forward to 2026, and here's the question nobody can stop asking. Where did Oprah go? Not gone from television, not gone from influence, not gone from Hollywood, but gone from Meghan Markle's world. Completely, quietly, and permanently. No more mentions, no more appearances together, no more subtle nods of solidarity, just silence. And if you understand anything about how Oprah Winfrey operates, you know that her silence is never just silence. It's a verdict. So what happened? What did Oprah see, hear, or realize that made one of the most publicly supportive figures in Meghan Markle's entire Hollywood circle simply disappear? And why does it all keep coming back to a wedding? Not just the spectacular one the world watched, but the secret one that was supposedly held 3 days before it. The one that, as it turns out, may not have happened the way it was described at all? Stay with me, because this story has layers, and every single layer matters. The guest list that raised every eyebrow in the palace. Let's go back to the beginning. Not to the drama, not to the headlines, but to the energy, the vibe. The very first signals that, in hindsight, told you everything you needed to know. When Meghan Markle stepped onto the world stage as Prince Harry's chosen partner, the reaction was extraordinary. There was genuine excitement. There was cultural pride. There was a sense that something different was happening inside Buckingham Palace, that the monarchy was shifting, opening, becoming something new. And for a lot of people, that feeling was real and it was beautiful. But even inside that excitement, if you looked closely, certain things didn't quite add up. Start with the wedding guest list. Because in royal circles, the guest list is never just a list of names. It's a statement. It's a declaration of who you are, where you came from, and who truly knows you. When Kate Middleton married Prince William in 2011, the people in those pews were the people from her actual life. Childhood friends, family members, people who knew her before any of this, people who could tell you embarrassing stories from her teenage years. That's the tradition. That's the point. Now look at who was sitting in St. George's Chapel for the Sussex wedding. George Clooney, Amal Clooney, Idris Elba, James Corden, Serena Williams, and yes, Oprah Winfrey. A list so glamorous, so perfectly curated, that it looked less like a wedding guest list and more like the front row of an awards ceremony. And here's the thing that keeps coming up from people who were actually inside that event. Guests were reportedly asking each other how they knew the couple. Not small talk, genuine confusion. Because many of them didn't have deep personal connections to Harry or Meghan at all. Now ask yourself, and I genuinely want you to think about this, when you invite someone to your wedding, what does that mean? It means they matter to your story. It means they're part of your real life. So what does it mean when your wedding looks like a networking event for people who might be useful later? Some people looked at that guest list and saw magic. Others, including, it appears, certain people who were actually sitting inside that chapel, started asking a different kind of question. Not how beautiful, but why? Not how romantic, but for whom? And Oprah was in that room, watching, processing, being Oprah, the woman who can read anyone and what she saw. Because here's what you have to understand about Oprah Winfrey if you want to understand why her eventual silence is so significant. This is not a woman who is easily fooled. This is not a woman who operates on surface impressions. Over 40 years of interviewing some of the most complex, manipulative, emotionally sophisticated people on the planet have given Oprah a radar that most human beings simply don't have. She has sat across from world leaders, convicted criminals, abuse survivors, Hollywood legends, and heads of state. She can read a room the way most people read a book, effortlessly, intuitively, and almost always accurately. So when Oprah Winfrey left that wedding and said publicly how overwhelmed she felt by Windsor, how magnificent it all seemed, she meant it. But she was also watching. And in her world, watching means absorbing everything. The words, yes, but also the gaps between the words. The moments where something doesn't quite sync. The energy in a room that contradicts what the room is supposed to feel like. There were already whispers coming from inside the palace about tension. Not big dramatic blow-ups, but the kind of persistent friction that, in an institution like the British monarchy, is actually far more damaging than a single loud confrontation. Stories about last-minute demands, about staff interactions that raised eyebrows, about a general sense that the new Duchess was approaching her role less like a responsibility and more like a production. One story that kept surfacing, and this one is worth paying attention to, was about requests to alter the atmosphere inside St. George's Chapel for the wedding ceremony. Now, you might hear that and think, what's the big deal? Lots of brides want things a certain way. But this isn't a regular venue. This is a chapel with nearly 1,000 years of royal history. When you start treating that kind of space like a set design problem to be solved, you're not just clashing with tradition. You're clashing with the entire cultural code that makes the monarchy what it is. And the palace shut it down instantly. No negotiation, no compromise, just no. And then there was the tiara situation. If you know anything about how royal households operate, you already understand why this one matters so much. When Queen Elizabeth II makes a decision, the matter is closed. That is simply how it works. It has always been how it works. But what reportedly happened around the tiara choice didn't follow that protocol. There was pushback. There was pressure. And when Prince Harry stepped in with what multiple sources later described as a "what Meghan wants, Meghan gets" attitude directed at royal staff and palace officials, people who had served the crown for decades, something shifted. Quietly, but unmistakably. The wedding hadn't even happened yet, and already the foundations of what would come later were being laid. When something feels off, even when you can't explain why. Here's where I want to pause and ask you something directly. Have you ever been in a situation where everything on the outside looked perfect? A friendship, a relationship, a professional partnership? But something in your gut kept telling you it wasn't quite right. That the surface and the reality weren't matching up? That the performance was slightly too polished and the real thing was slightly too absent? Because that's the feeling that keeps coming up when you talk to people who were close to this situation. Not hate, not jealousy. Just a growing uncomfortable sense that what the world was being shown and what was actually happening were two different stories. And nobody is more attuned to that feeling than Oprah Winfrey. Think about the most important relationships in your own life, the ones built on real trust. Did they feel curated? Did they feel managed? Or did they feel like something that just existed, naturally and without performance? Because the relationships that last, the ones that hold up under pressure and time, have a texture to them that manufactured ones never quite replicate. And the more time passes, the more obvious the difference becomes to the people inside them. That's what was slowly becoming clear to those in Meghan's orbit. Not all at once, not dramatically, just piece by piece, interaction by interaction, story by story. A creeping awareness that something at the center of all this wasn't quite what it appeared to be. And Oprah, with her extraordinary professional instincts honed over 4 decades, was almost certainly among the first to feel it. The interview that changed everything, and then changed again. Now we need to talk about 2021. Because everything accelerates here. The interview, the one that aired on CBS on March 7th, 2021, the one that was watched by an estimated 49 million viewers in its first week. The one where Meghan Markle sat across from Oprah Winfrey in a garden and said things that shook the monarchy to its foundations. Think about what that interview represented for a moment, not just as a piece of television, but as a cultural event. Here was Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, sitting down with the single most trusted interviewer in America, perhaps in the world, and making claims that, if true, were devastating. Claims about racism within the royal family, claims about being denied mental health support, claims about feeling suicidal, claims about being isolated and controlled. And Oprah received every one of those claims with full belief, open body language, emotional validation, real-time reactions of shock and empathy. When Oprah reacts that way on camera, it functions as a massive credibility endorsement. Because the logic is simple, if Oprah believes it, it must be true. That's how powerful her brand is. That's how much trust she has built over 4 decades. But then something happened that nobody fully anticipated. The secret wedding claim. During the interview, Meghan revealed that she and Harry had actually gotten married privately, in a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard, 3 days before the massive public wedding at Windsor. She described it as something personal and meaningful, just the two of them and Archbishop Justin Welby. The idea being that the real wedding, the sacred one, the one that actually counted emotionally, was that quiet, private moment. It was a beautiful story, romantic, intimate, the kind of detail that makes viewers lean forward and think, okay, that's real, that's human, that's authentic. Except Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, came out and clarified that this wasn't quite accurate. The legal wedding, the official ceremony recognized by law and by the Church of England, was the public one at Windsor. What apparently happened in the garden was a private prayer exchange, a blessing perhaps, but not a legally or ecclesiastically valid marriage ceremony. Not a wedding. Now pause. Because I need you to really sit with what this means. This isn't a small discrepancy. This isn't a misremembered detail about what color a dress was or what time something started. This is a fundamental claim about one of the most documented events in modern history, a royal wedding that billions of people watched, being described in a way that the presiding Archbishop of Canterbury himself had to correct publicly. And Oprah didn't catch it in the interview, didn't challenge it, didn't ask a single follow-up question, just accepted it as presented and moved on. When that correction came out, it didn't just affect Meghan's credibility, it affected Oprah's. Directly, deeply, personally. The crack in the foundation of the world's most trusted brand. Let's be clear about something. For Oprah Winfrey, credibility is not a career asset. It's the entire career. It's the foundation of everything she has ever built. From the early days of her talk show, to the interviews that defined American culture, to the launch of her own network. Every single piece of it rests on one thing: the belief that when Oprah sits across from you and nods, she's nodding at the truth. Not a version of the truth. Not a narrative constructed for maximum impact. The actual truth. So when a claim made in one of the most watched interviews she ever conducted turns out to be materially inaccurate, not challenged in the moment, not followed up with, not corrected in real time, the damage to that brand isn't minor. It's a crack in the foundation. And Oprah knows this better than anyone. Now imagine her replaying that interview in her mind after Welby's clarification. Imagine her going back through every moment, every reaction, every nod of belief, and seeing it differently. seeing herself as someone who was potentially used as a vehicle for a narrative rather than a searcher after truth. How does a woman like Oprah Winfrey respond to that realization? She doesn't hold a press conference. She doesn't issue a statement. She doesn't write an op-ed. She does the most powerful thing available to someone of her stature. She goes quiet. And she stays quiet. But the secret wedding wasn't the only inconsistency that surfaced after the interview aired. It was just the most visible one. What followed was a slow accumulation of smaller discrepancies, details that didn't quite match public records, timelines that shifted slightly when examined closely, emotional accounts that contradicted statements made in other contexts. Each one, individually, might have been dismissible, a misremembering, a matter of perspective, a detail lost in translation. But they kept coming. And in the world of television, in the world of media, in the world of Hollywood power structures, it's never one thing that ends a relationship. It's the accumulation. It's the pattern. It's the moment when enough small doubts pile up that the whole picture stops looking real. Think about it this way. Have you ever trusted someone completely and then found out they weren't fully honest with you about something relatively small? And even though the small thing didn't destroy your relationship, you suddenly started replaying every conversation you'd ever had with them in a slightly different light? You didn't stop trusting them all at once. The trust just quietly eroded piece by piece, until one day you realized it was mostly gone? That's what appears to have happened across an entire Hollywood circle. Not a dramatic falling out, just a gradual withdrawal, a slow stepping back, a quiet removal of access and alignment, the Hollywood circle that quietly disappeared. Look at George and Amal Clooney, because their trajectory tells you everything. In 2018, they were at the wedding, they were publicly supportive, and there were reports, credible ones, that they offered their home on Lake Como as a potential refuge for Harry and Meghan during their difficult transition period. That's not casual celebrity support. That's genuine personal investment. You don't offer your private home to someone unless you believe in them on a real level. But by 2025 and into 2026, George Clooney is showing up at events connected to King Charles III, to the institution that Harry and Meghan spent years publicly criticizing. The shift in alignment couldn't be more obvious if someone had drawn a diagram. And significantly, there's been no public explanation, no statement, no falling out played out in the press. Just a quiet reorientation toward an entirely different part of the royal story. That's not accidental. That's a choice. And choices like that, made quietly and without drama by someone of George Clooney's profile, reflect a private assessment that most people will never hear about publicly. Now think about the entire Hollywood ecosystem around Harry and Meghan in 2018 versus today. The names that were in those pews, the people who were mentioned in the same breath, the publicists, the producers, the power brokers who were reportedly in early conversations about projects and partnerships and long-term strategic alignments. Where are they now? The silence is loud, and Oprah's silence is the loudest of all. Here's something worth examining carefully. There were reports, and these surfaced from multiple sources over time, that Meghan was pitching ideas simultaneously to several different high-profile figures in Hollywood. Documentaries, projects, partnership opportunities, branded content concepts. In Hollywood, being ambitious is not a crime. Pitching multiple projects is normal. Working multiple rooms at once is practically a survival skill. But there's a difference between professional ambition and making people feel like they're interchangeable. There's a difference between networking and treating relationships primarily as strategic assets. And in Hollywood specifically, where the whole machine runs on trust, loyalty, and the invisible currency of genuine connection, if people start feeling like they're just one option on a list, rather than a real relationship, the response is always the same. They don't confront you. They don't argue. They don't send a letter explaining their decision. They just stop picking up. And slowly, quietly, Invisibly, the circle shrinks. The calls go unanswered. The invitations dry up. The projects don't come together. The collaborations that seemed imminent somehow never materialize, and one day you look around and the people who were supposedly in your corner are just elsewhere. That's what appears to have happened here, and Oprah's disappearance from Meghan's visible world is the clearest indicator of that dynamic at work, because when Oprah steps back, she's not just one person stepping back. She's a signal to the entire industry. She's the weather vane that tells everyone else which way the wind is blowing. When Oprah distances herself from someone, it functions as a permission structure for everyone else to do the same. Quietly, without drama, without ever having to explain why. Even Gayle King has gone quiet. And that's deafening. And then there's Gayle King. And this one really matters. Gayle King is not just Oprah's best friend. She's been one of the most publicly outspoken defenders of Harry and Meghan in the entire media landscape. When the couple were being criticized, and the criticism was sometimes fierce and often unfair, Gayle King was one of the voices pushing back most vocally. She used her platform, her credibility, her relationship with Oprah, her standing in the industry to advocate for them. And now, she's quieter, noticeably quieter. The kind of quiet that, coming from someone who is by nature vocal and opinionated, actually says quite a lot. Because Gayle King doesn't go quiet accidentally. She's a professional communicator. When she stops saying something, it's because she has made a decision not to say it. And if even Gayle King is pulling back, someone whose loyalty to Oprah's judgments is ironclad, someone who was publicly defending Harry and Meghan when the entire British press was going after them, then something significant has shifted in the private conversations that never make it to the surface. When your most enthusiastic defenders start going quiet, the story has changed. Fundamentally. And the fact that the silence is coming not just from Oprah, but from the innermost ring of Oprah's own world. Her closest friend, her most trusted confidant, tells you that whatever has been processed and decided in private goes far deeper than a surface-level falling out. This is a considered, deliberate, permanent repositioning, and it applies to everyone inside that circle. The anatomy of a narrative, and when it starts to show its seams. Let's talk about the pattern of the narrative itself, because this is where I think the most interesting and under-examined part of this whole story lives. When you look back at the arc of how Harry and Meghan presented themselves to the world, from the wedding, through the interview, through the Netflix documentary, through Harry's memoir, there is a consistent quality to it that's worth examining carefully. The stories are always emotionally compelling. The details are always vivid. The villains are always clearly identified. The emotional journey always has a clear protagonist, and a clear set of obstacles placed there by specific people. It's good storytelling. Really good storytelling. But here's the thing about really good storytelling versus really authentic truth-telling. Good storytelling has shape. It has arc. It has emotional peaks engineered for maximum impact. It's designed. And the world's best interviewers, the people who have spent their entire careers learning to distinguish performance from reality, they eventually start to feel the shape. When Oprah conducted that 2021 interview, she was operating in real time, receiving an emotional account that she had no immediate way to verify. Her reactions were genuine responses to what she was being told. But Oprah doesn't just experience interviews. She reviews them. She reflects on them. She runs them through the processor of everything she knows about human beings and human truth. And somewhere in that processing, something apparently didn't hold up. Not everything, perhaps, not the whole picture, but enough. Enough for the relationship to change, enough for the access to be quietly removed, enough for the woman whose public endorsement had been one of the most powerful shields around Meghan Markle's reputation to simply step away. Ask yourself this. Have you ever watched a film or a TV show that gripped you completely in the moment, and then later, maybe a day later, maybe a week, you started noticing things that didn't add up? Plot holes that the pace of the experience had hidden from you? Moments where the emotion had been manufactured rather than earned? And did that realization change how you felt about the whole thing, retroactively? Did it make the experience feel slightly less real in your memory? That's exactly the kind of retroactive reassessment that appears to have happened for Oprah. And once that lens shifts, it doesn't shift back. Prince Harry, the man caught in the middle of it all. Now I want to talk about Prince Harry. Because in all of this, Harry is the figure whose trajectory is perhaps the saddest. Harry is not Meghan Markle. Whatever you think about the choices that were made, whatever you believe about who was driving the decisions in their relationship, Harry is a man who gave up an enormous amount: his family, his position, his country, his military identity, for a relationship and a life he believed in. He walked away from the one institution that had defined him from birth because he believed genuinely that there was something worth building outside of it. And now, the Hollywood circle that was supposed to support that new life has largely retreated. The strategic alliances that were supposed to protect and amplify their brand have gone quiet. The interview that was supposed to be a watershed moment of truth-telling turned out to have credibility problems attached to some of its central claims. The Netflix deals were done, the memoir was published, the podcasts came and went, and through all of it, the sense of genuine Hollywood belonging, the real thing, not the curated version, never quite materialized. Think about Harry in 2026. Think about where he actually is, relationally, professionally, personally. He's not on good terms with his father. His relationship with his brother is publicly fractured. His grandmother, the woman he loved deeply and who represented the last real bridge between him and his family, is gone. The friends who surrounded that 2018 wedding have mostly drifted. And the interview that Oprah hosted, the one meant to be Harry's declaration of freedom, has become one of the most scrutinized and fact-checked pieces of television of the last decade. Oprah went quiet, and somewhere in that silence, I think Harry can feel exactly what it means. Because Harry didn't just lose a family when he left the royal institution. He lost a sense of belonging, the deep structural kind that you can't replicate by building a new circle from scratch, no matter how famous or powerful the people in it are. And as the famous and powerful people in that new circle have themselves quietly retreated, what remains is a man in Montecito who gave up everything and is still, somehow, looking for the place where he fits. William and Catherine. Why quiet consistency is winning. There's a contrast that keeps coming up when people talk about this whole narrative, and it's one that I think deserves serious attention. Because while the Sussex story has been defined by noise, by headlines, by books, by documentaries, by carefully managed media moments, the Wales story has been defined by something almost old-fashioned: consistency. Prince William and Catherine have faced their own storms. Catherine's health crisis in 2024 was deeply serious and genuinely frightening, and the way they navigated it, with dignity, with relative privacy, with a clear sense of priority, earned them something that no amount of strategic media management can manufacture. Trust, not because they're perfect, not because the institution they represent is without flaws, but because when you watch them over time, the public version and the private signals seem to be pointing in the same direction. And for an audience that has become increasingly sophisticated about the difference between authentic and performed, and for figures like Oprah Winfrey, who have spent their entire lives mastering that distinction, consistency is ultimately more compelling than any single spectacular story. You can hold the world's attention for a moment with a brilliant narrative, but you hold people's trust over years only with something real. And that contrast is now impossible to ignore. It's not that William and Catherine are exciting in the way that the Sussex narrative was exciting. It's that they have demonstrated, over time and under genuine pressure, a quality that the Sussex narrative ultimately failed to sustain: authenticity. The real kind. The kind that doesn't require management. the kind that doesn't crack under scrutiny, the kind that Oprah Winfrey can sit with and feel that the surface and the substance are the same thing. What Oprah's silence is actually saying. So where does this leave us? What is the actual conclusion of this story? Here's what I believe, and I want you to think about whether you agree. Oprah Winfrey is not a villain in this story. She was not manipulative. She was not complicit in some grand deception. She is a human being who extended trust and support to a couple who appeared to need it, in circumstances that genuinely called for empathy and public courage. The issues Harry and Meghan raised about their experiences, the racism, the mental health struggles, the institutional coldness, some of those things were real. Many of those things were real. But there is a difference between having real experiences and presenting those experiences with complete accuracy. There is a difference between being genuinely hurt and weaponizing that hurt for strategic purposes. And there is a difference between seeking support from powerful people and treating those people as assets in a long-term reputation management operation. And the difference matters enormously to Oprah Winfrey, because her entire life's work is built on the ability to tell those things apart. When the secret wedding story was corrected publicly, something crystallized for Oprah that had perhaps been forming for a long time. The realization wasn't necessarily that Meghan was a bad person. It was something more subtle and ultimately more devastating to the relationship. The realization that she had been positioned, not connected, that she had been useful, not trusted with the full truth, that the interview, for all its emotional power, had served a strategic function more than it had served the truth. And Oprah Winfrey, after 40 years of building something on that truth, simply cannot afford that. The biggest thing to understand about what has happened here is that Oprah's withdrawal isn't just a personal falling out between two powerful women. It's a cultural signal. When Oprah Winfrey stops backing you, the ripple effect across Hollywood is immediate and lasting. Not because people are followers, but because Oprah's judgment has historically been one of the most reliable indicators in that entire ecosystem. She has been wrong before, certainly. Everyone has. But her track record is extraordinary. And when she reverses course on something or someone, people pay attention. The A-listers who were at that wedding aren't vocal critics of Harry and Meghan. They're not writing articles. They're not going on podcasts to talk about what went wrong. They're doing something far more powerful and far more permanent. They're acting like it never happened. And in Hollywood, that's the end. The final verdict, and the question only you can answer. So here's my final question to you, and I want you to really think about this one. If you had built your entire reputation on reading people, on knowing who was telling you the truth and who was performing a version of it, and you slowly realized you had been given the performance rather than the truth on one of the biggest stages of your career, what would you do? Would you hold a press conference? Would you tweet about it? Would you go on record? Or would you do exactly what Oprah has done? Go quiet, remove access, stop showing up, and let the silence say everything your words never will. Because the thing about Oprah's silence on Meghan Markle in 2026 is that it's not confusion, it's not indifference, it's not forgetting. Oprah Winfrey doesn't forget. She doesn't disengage accidentally. She doesn't let relationships drift out of carelessness. Every choice she makes is deliberate, including the choice to say nothing. And nothing, in this case, says everything. The wedding looked perfect. The interview felt monumental. The story was powerful. But somewhere between the fairy tale and the reality, something broke. And when it broke, the most trusted reader of people in the world quietly closed the book. Not with anger, not with a headline, just with silence. And if you listen carefully enough, that silence is the loudest thing in the room. If this story made you think about trust, about narrative, about the difference between what we're shown and what's actually true, drop a comment below. What do you think Oprah actually knows that she's never said publicly? And do you think Harry and Meghan's story still has a chapter left to tell? Let me know. I read every single one.